In this video, we're going to tie this little buggy pattern, which is Chris Johnson's Rio Bandito. Chris Johnson owns Living Waters Fly Shop in Round Rock, Texas, and he created this fly a number of years ago for Rio Grande Cichlids there in his local area. But it has proven extremely effective for a multitude of species all over. As a matter of fact, some of us have personally caught well over a dozen species on this, from panfish to Rio Grande Cichlids to trout to smallmouth bass. It is just a really effective pattern. It imitates a small crawfish and is just really a great addition to your fly box. So let's get started. The hook that I'm using for this pattern is a size 12 jig hook with a 1/8 inch brass bead. Now, I fish a lot of still water, so this brass bead gives me the proper sink rate for that. But if you fish in moving water or want a faster sink rate, certainly use a slotted tungsten bead for this. This fly can be tied down to about a size 16, and I've heard of it being tied up as large as a size 8 or so. So it's a very, very versatile pattern. For thread, I'm using ultra thread in 140 denier, and this is burnt orange. And I like this slightly thicker thread for this size fly. I get the thread started behind the bead and lay down a nice thread base all the way back to the bend of the hook. And bring my thread back then to about the point of the hook and then trim off that tag end. Now, virtually the only material for this fly other than legs and bead and hook is Australian Possum in Crawfish orange, and this is an extremely difficult material to find. Matter of fact, the only place I know you can find it is directly from Chris at Living Waters Fly Fishing, so give them a call for that, and it works really well. But I will list some substitute materials in the description of the video. And after clipping a pretty ample clump from the hide, we want to make sure we strip out any of that underfur. Now save that underfur, as that's going to be our dubbing for the fly. And again, I'll have substitutes for that dubbing should you not have this Australian possum. So we want a tail length, roughly the length of the hook shaft. Let me get rid of some of those little extra long fibers there. And so that's about right, and I'll transfer that measurement there, and we'll give that a few wraps. And then let's take a quick look at our length. Yep, that looks about right. And so then we'll wrap those tail fibers back all the way to the bend of the hook, and then again bring my thread back to about the hook point, and then trim off that excess hair, and that's our tail for the pattern. This is a very buggy pattern. And then next we want legs, and for legs we're using grizzly micro legs and root beer, and I'll take one section of leg and fold that in half. We'll only use half of this one, and then cut it so I have a section about 3 inches long. And any number of ways to tie in legs. I like to loop them around the thread at the halfway point, pull it up, give it a few loose wraps of thread, and then pull the legs down on each side of the fly and wrap back to the base of our tail. And it helps to flare the legs if those last few wraps are really tight. Went back a little too far there. There we go. And so you see our legs are flared out slightly. So at this point we may as well go ahead and trim our legs, and we want them just a bit longer than the tail, not much longer than the tail. And let's pull those down on each side just a bit. And there we go. We have a nice V of our legs. Now at this point in the pattern, this is where the technique I'm going to show you in this video diverges a bit from Chris Johnson. Chris uses the split thread method, and so he does a dubbing not a dubbing loop, but a split thread dubbing where he splits the thread in the center, and he actually dubs the body and the collar all at once, which is a very efficient way and a great way of doing that. It makes a nice body that's very buggy, and the collar, and it's a very quick way to do that. But it's also fairly difficult and takes a good bit of practice. You could do a dubbing loop here, and also in that dubbing loop dub the body and the collar in the same dubbing loop, but we're going to separate those out just to make it a bit easier to tie. But I would encourage you to go ahead and practice those methods, either a dubbing loop with both the body dubbing and the collar in it, or a split thread method, and you can watch Chris's video on that to dub both the body and the collar at the same time. However, we're going to do a traditional dubbing noodle, and I'm going to put some dubbing wax on there, and this is a clump of the underfur that I pull out from that Australian possum fur that we're using for the tail and for the collar. And we want a fairly bushy body on this. This is a really buggy fly, so we want to build a relatively thick dubbing noodle that is about 2 inches long. And we can always, that's the advantage of a dubbing noodle over a loop, we can always pull some of that off if we have a little bit too much. So there's a relatively thick dubbing noodle, and again, it's about 2 inches long. So I start that dubbing back at the back of my fly, and I go all the way forward with it, and this is going to be a little bit too much. I want to go almost to the bead with it, not quite, but almost to the bead, and then see I can just pull that excess dubbing out, and then take a few wraps. I want to go ahead and brush out this body, because in Chris's method of the split thread dubbing or using a dubbing loop, your body would be fairly buggy at this point. So I'm going to take, this is a gun cleaning brush, and I'm going to take it and just pick out that body. Again, this is a really, as you can see, a very buggy fly. Now for the collar on the fly, which is the last step on this fly, we actually use the guard hairs of the Australian possum fur. This is a dyed Australian possum 1/4 skin from Chris Johnson's Living Waters Fly Shop. It is just beautiful hairs, extremely thick, very thick under fur, and this works really, really well for this pattern. For the collar, I want a fairly generous clump of this, so I'm going to reach in with my scissors and cut off a fairly large clump of that for the collar, and then of course pull out all of this under fur at the base of it, and then get it prepared to go in my dubbing tweezers. And after cutting an ample clump, probably about twice the size of the clump you cut for the tail, I place that fur and spread it out, and I'm using Loon's dubbing tweezers, which makes it very nice to separate those hair fibers out and hold them for the dubbing loop. I want about 1 inch of these, a length of about 1 inch, and I pull the nice thing about the tweezers, I can pull these out and get them all about the same length. And I want the guard hairs, in this case on the left side of my tweezers, to be about the length of the hook, and that looks about right. So at this point I don't want all of these bases to those hairs, so I'll trim those off, leaving about 1/8 of an inch there. And I'll set that aside, and then I'll pull back about 4 inches of thread and make a dubbing loop. So I'll come over and create my dubbing loop, and then I like to take a couple of wraps around the base of that loop. And you can see I'm just holding that loop open with my fingers at this point. And I get my dubbing tool that I'll use to twist later with in there. And then the tricky part comes is I want to slip this hair right in that loop, let go of it so the loop closes down, and then remove my tweezers. And if everything works well, it all should sit just like that. And I can even that out just a little bit if some of it's longer than the other, but that looks fine. So I've got about a 1-inch length of that hair, and I spin that dubbing whirl, just spin it, spin it, spin it, and make a nice dubbing brush with that. And then once I have my dubbing brush made, I just start wrapping that collar with it. And it looks like way too much, but if it's too much, we can stop early. So I pull those hair fibers back with each loop, each wrap. Pull them back, pull them back, and again, it's a very buggy fly, so pull them back, and there we go. That's all of my fibers. Capture that dubbing loop with my thread, take a couple of wraps, and then trim off my dubbing loop, excess dubbing loop thread. There. Now we're almost finished, but at this point, let's just hold those hair fibers back, take a few wraps of thread right behind the bead. Whoops. There we go. And then I will give it a 3 or 4 turn whip finish. Trim off my excess. And at this point, I'm not going to in the video, but at this point you could apply your head cement of your choice. I use Sally Hansen Hard as Nails. But for one final step on this fly, we want to give it a haircut. So we want to cut off. This fly will ride inverted because of the jig hook. So this, what's on the top to us, will actually be the bottom part of the fly. So we want to hold our scissors level. First, let's make sure those fibers are evenly distributed. Then we want to hold our scissors level and trim that hair down flat on top. And sometimes you have to hold the scissors at a 90-degree angle to the hook shaft to get in there and get all of those. And so we've given it a nice flat top haircut. And that is a Rio Bandito, an extremely buggy, extremely effective fly pattern that with a little bit of practice is quite easy to tie. And again, I will have alternate materials in the description of the video, but I would encourage you to call Living Waters Fly Shop in Round Rock and order some of the Australian Possum because it is a wonderful material for this pattern. Hope you'll give it a try.